Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to a special review for the brand new, yes, brand new Dokken album, Heaven Comes Down, 12th studio album from the band and first in 11 long years. Super excited about this here. Just came out on Friday, October 27th of 2023. And the cool thing is the band is also celebrating their 45th anniversary this year. So I'll break all that down. We'll do an unboxing of the album and everything. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, if you turn on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this, with a review for the brand new Dokken album, Heaven Comes Down. So before we get into that, though, I want to give you guys a little bit of context, a little bit of history on the band. I think it'll help you understand where I'm going in terms of my overall review. The band itself formed back in 1978, and not a lot of people know that. There were, of course, many different lineups early on with the band. Their first one came out in 1979, while their debut album, Breaking the Chains, didn't come out until 1981. And yeah, again, some of you guys might be scratching your head right about now saying, wait a minute, I thought it was 1983. But this is a German edition of it, which did come out under the Dokken name before reverting just to Dokken. But of course, you guys all know it as this, the 1983 remixed version of the original German release. So there you go, 2 years difference between it. So if you've ever thought this first album here sounded a bit different than the follow-up Tooth and Nail, that's because this was actually recorded in 81 and this here is 1984. So big difference there in terms of time frame. But as you know, talking about with here, that classic lineup that we know the band as, which first appears on this album here. So we've got Don Dokken, George Lynch, Jeff Pilson, and Mick Brown. Jeff Pilson did not record on Breaking the Chains. That was Juan Krauser from Rat, or who would go on to play with Rat. And so 1984, Tooth and Nail, that's the first one that the classic lineup does together. And they would record 2 more albums together, you know, hit the top of the charts, have million-selling albums, sold-out tours, all that great stuff. But unfortunately, they broke up in 1989. Really kind of right before they were going to peak and I think really break through, kind of the same thing that happened with Motley Crue. They just stopped a little too early for all that to take place. They would reunite though in 1993, so 4 short years later, and record 2 more albums together, but unfortunately that has been the last of the original lineup together in terms of new albums. Dunn, though, has continued the band ever since. And again, lots of different members throughout this time frame. But we got some killer guitar players in there. Reb Beach of Winger, and of course now with also with White Snake, joined for Erase the Slate in 1999. I think if that album had come out any other time than the late 90s, it'd have been very successful. John Norum of Europe came in and recorded Long Way Home in 2002. So you've got, you know, guitar players from Winger, from Europe. Now we've got John Levin in the lineup, and he has played with Doro. He joined in 2003 and has been with the band for 20 years. So John Levin has actually been with the band longer than George Lynch was. I think really helping to continue the lineup and the sound of the band and make a footprint in the band itself far beyond just what we know the classic lineup for. And so since the time that John Levin has joined, they've done 4 albums, Hell to Pay in 2004, Lightning Strikes in 2008, Broken Bones in 2012, and then 11 years later we get to this one, Heaven Comes Down, the one we're going to talk about right here, right now. So 12th studio album, 10 tracks are on this, clocking in at the short 42 minutes time. Now, that's because most of their albums have a lot more material on it. But I will say this, of the 42 minutes, I never have a chance to get worn out on anything. So, you know, while I grew up in an era where albums were 60 plus minutes oftentimes, I will say there was often times where I would stop an album long before it was complete and take it out. Now that bands have returned to doing these albums that are in the 40 to 45 minute mark, I play them all the way through, especially even if I get to track number 8 and I'm thinking, oh, maybe I want to take it off and put something else on. I usually say, oh, there's only 1 or 2 songs left. I'll just hear it out so I can complete my listening experience. But I'm finding that the shorter albums, and especially in this case, there's no filler tracks on this. I'm going to say that right up front here. I think all the songs on this album are really good. Another thing of note is there's no cover songs on this one. They're all originals. Don Dokken writes one by himself, with the other 9 songs being co-written between Don Dokken and Jon Levin. So, as I mentioned, 11 years since Broken Bones. But in that time, the band wasn't, completely dormant, not doing anything. Of course, always touring in between these long hiatuses. But we did get this album. It was called Return to the East in 2016 and was a reunion album of the 4 classic members. One new studio song was written for that album, but unfortunately not a real reunion. It was just done for some live dates, and otherwise Don continued with the current lineup, and that's where we're still getting this. And I'm okay with that, and I'll get into a bit more of that later on. Another thing that came out was The Lost Songs, 1978 to 81. So this is that early period that I'm talking about. And of course, actually, maybe since this is out, maybe more of you guys did know that the band started in 1978. But really, up until this, most people just thought the band started in 1983. So that one was a compilation album. It's not really a new album. It did have new vocals on some tracks, some new guitar parts, stuff like that, finishing things off. But otherwise, it's a compilation of early demo recorded tracks and singles and things like that. So the lineup for this album, Heaven Comes Down, we've got, of course, Don Dokken on vocals. And as I understand it, I don't think he plays any guitar on this. He's had, I don't know if it was some medical issues or whatnot, but not able to play guitar. So I don't think he records guitar. I think Jon Levin handles all the guitars on this. We have Chris McCarville on bass, coming from House of Lords. And then we've got his fellow House of Lords bandmate, BJ Zampa, on drums. Now, whether or not those two guys are still with the current lineup of House of Lords, I'm not entirely sure, but they both have played with the band in the past and made a number of albums with the band. So I thought that was kind of cool, bringing over the rhythm section from House of Lords. So we've got the core guys that have been in Dokken for the last 20 years, Don and John, now adding in the House of Lords rhythm section. And in my opinion, the band proves to be more than up to task of, making this some of the best musical work of their career, in my opinion. Now, the band was musically in limbo, in my opinion, not really knowing where it wanted to go musically for a decade, from 1995 with the reunion album Dysfunctional up through the 2004 album, which was the first one to feature Jon Levin, Hell to Pay. This is where they started to come back, but not really yet. They finally made the return to form on these 2 albums here. Lightning Strikes from 2008 and Broken Bones in 2012. So with all of the band has been returning to their original sound, and of course that's really what they've done here on this one. And musically, in my opinion, I think the new album is the best album they have done since 1987's Back for the Attack. Now, I'm not saying it is as good as that. I don't think anything can ever outdo those first 4 original albums. But when we're just comparing the albums themselves, I love the last 2 albums that have been done. I even like those ones in that limbo area of that decade. There's good standout things, and I like the sound of some of the different directions that they went. But I will say again, I think this album here is the best thing they have done since 1987. Jon Levin on this really shines. I mean, he is the person carrying the torch on this album, and he just simply outdoes himself. I thought the last 2 albums that he did were great, but this one here utterly fantastic. Now, let's get to the elephant in the room. I know you guys have all been waiting for me to get to this part. I'm talking about Don's vocals. You know, we've all heard the different things in the media. If you've been and you've seen him live, and a lot of people say, you know, his voice is shot, he can't sing, and I'm not speaking about the live stuff specifically. But I think in that case, the live issue is that he is trying to still sing those old songs in the old style, which he can no longer do. He can't hit the high notes. He doesn't have as much variation in his voice like he used to. But on this album here, while he doesn't hit those highs and he doesn't do the crazy variation like he used to do, I think he sounds really good. And I don't just saying that, I mean, I think it's actually sounds amazing on here. And let's not forget, Don Dokken is 70 years old. And just for that alone, I think the album sounds great. But he is singing in his lower register, and he's keeping it much more of an even performance throughout. Whereas, again, if we go back to those first 4 albums, there's much more excitement or peaks and valleys, that sort of stuff within the vocal performance. He isn't going to do that anymore, so I think we have to let that go. But he isn't trying to sing outside of his range, which means we never hear his vocals strained on this album. And I think that's the difference between seeing him live, where his vocals might sound strained, versus what we're getting on the album. So don't let those live performances on YouTube dissuade you from checking out this album, because he actually sounds really good on here. I think Don has finally accepted his limitations. He's working with what he's got. He's working with those in those confines, and I think he's doing very well with it. And I think the vocals within the context of the album, because he sings in that same style throughout the entirety of this album, which makes listening to this album sound very good, because we're not hearing, say, a best of where he's singing one way back in the 80s and he can't do that today sort of a thing. This is him singing all in that register, all in that range. And so as a whole, for what this album is, I think it's really good. The pairing of Don's vocals on this, the way he sings today, but with the fantastic, amazing guitar from John Levin, makes this album fantastic when you judge it on your own. So let's talk about some standout tracks on this album. Track number 1, Fugitive. It was the first single. I think it's a fantastic opener for the album itself. Very classic feel to the song, especially musically on it. The way the song slowly builds at the beginning and then it kicks in, I think it's may be the best song on the album, but it may also just be that I had listened to this one more than any song on the album. But after listening to the whole album, I still really like this track. Track number 2, Gypsy. This was the second single off of the album, maybe the album's most hard rockin' song on the album. And of course, I know that's not saying much. Dokken has never really rocked out all that hard, but due to the vocal nature and where Don is, it's never going to be very heavy anymore, because he just can't sing in that style. But it is a good rockin' song. I like that it builds on what the first song of the album did, and it continues that higher energy from where the album opens to the second track, and so it just keeps your excitement going. I think it was a great placement for those 2 songs, which may well be why those are the first 2 singles. And normally I don't talk about the singles because you've already heard them, but I do think that sets up context for this album. Great one that is not yet a single, at least, and probably should be, track number 4, Just Like a Rose. Killer guitar work on this one. Right at the opening, it settles into sort of a mid-pace rocker going forward on it. It's got more classic vibes. I think the album as a whole has a lot of classic vibes to it, so I could probably say that about any track on here. Moving on to track number 8, and there's a lot of great ones in between that. It's just I'm only touching on a few here. The song is called I Remember. Second of 2 ballads that are on this album, but then the band has always been known for doing its ballads, so don't let that shy you away from checking it out. This one here I think would feel right at home back on any of their albums out of the 80s. It's got that classic early vibes feel to it. John's guitar fills on it really elevate it above where it could have lived, just in a great ballad land, so to speak. But we've got John's guitar work on it elevating this track, so it makes it just stand out even more. The last track on the album, track number 10, Santa Fe. This is something a little different. I wasn't expecting it. It's an acoustic rocker. It is not even a ballad. And it closes out the album. Kind of feel like I want to light some candles and sit back and chill a little bit as the light on the album, begins to dim because it's the last track. But I really, really liked this song. It's also got a bit of an uplifting feel to it, so even though we're ending the album, it doesn't just feel somber all the way. The vocals on this, or I should say the music fits the vocals perfectly on this album, and Don sounds great here. I would love to hear more of this, whether that means a Don Dokken solo album done in this style here, or whether or not maybe it's time for Dokken to make another acoustic album like they did back in the early 90s. Who knows? So let's go ahead and take a look at the album. Front cover of the album, which I think has amazing artwork. I was never very happy with Broken Bones. I just thought that was some sort of cheesy, silly artwork there. So they finally outdid themselves on it. A little bit like this album, Lightning Strikes. I thought that had some more classic art. But here we go. Some of the best art maybe that they've ever had. And here's the back side of it. In fact, if we open up the whole thing together, it works nicely together. But we've got Don singing in shadow there, which kind of in the moonlight, which I think is very cool. Album tracks there, and then we've got the inside of the album. The album itself, or the CD, has the same picture as what's underneath it, which of course is also that. So a little bit of repetition there, but very cool. One more thing, the front cover of it, if you can see the light reflecting off of the Dokken logo as I move it around there, I thought that was a nice touch to put that in a glossy finish where everything else is matte. Let me take out the booklet now and show you guys that. Same thing on the front cover. Great shot there of Don, and we have the lyrics individually in here, of course telling us who wrote all of the tracks. Moving in with John Levin there, more lyrics, and we get a cool band shot of the guys live. More lyrics, and then we start getting into the other guys, Chris McCarville and BJ Zampata there at the end. Two guys from House of Lords, another band shot, and the back of it. And I just gotta say, I'm appreciative that even though Don is 70 years old, that he's still putting pictures of himself in the album. Other bands are getting up in years and they're not doing it. And we got individual shots, we got a live shot, and we got a group band shot. So very cool. I'm still a fan of the physical album. I want the photos and things like that in the album, and they delivered. So bottom line on this new album here, I think you already know my take on it, but I want to kick off by just saying, no, Don will never sound like he used to, so let's get over that already. I'm sure a bunch of you are still going to complain about it, but it's not going to happen. Just like Def Leppard's never going to return to form on their earlier sounding stuff. This here is what Dokken sounds like today, but I think the album is amazing. It's a fantastic album from one of the best 80s rock bands. They've been doing it for over 45 years now. John Levin has more than proven himself. The guy's been around for 20 years filling the shoes of George Lynch. George is phenomenal. I think John is phenomenal. And these two guys are the two best guitar players that Dokken has ever had. I'm glad John is in the band. I actually don't even miss George because John is so good at what he does. And if the band were ever to reform, I would actually want them to do what Iron Maiden did and keep John in the lineup while bringing back George. In fact, with the last tour that they did, and George would come out and play 3 songs at the end of the night, on every night of the tour, you did have that lineup where George rejoined and you had John still in the band. So obviously they're on good terms. Maybe that'll be the case down the road as a farewell thing or something. But either way, I stand by my earlier statement. I think that this is the best album that the band has made since 1987's Back for the Attack. Incidentally, Back for the Attack is my favorite album by the band. Not that that has any correlation on this here, but best album since then. And you know, they're not going to replace, or this album here is not going to replace any of those 4 albums. I'm not saying that. But it does make me long for those days all over again. I get a big smile on my face, just like I have right now while I'm reviewing this, you know, while listening to this killer new album in 2023. I think you guys might feel the same way. I think you should definitely check it out and give this album a listen and see what you think. Killer album, in my opinion. There you go. That is the brand new Dokken album, Heaven Comes Down album review. I've also done a review for the Lost Song, so if you want to know a little bit more about this thing here, I will leave a link in the description for that. But otherwise, there you go. Album review for the new Dokken. Let me know what you think of it. Let's keep in context here to where we are today with this album and where Don is today. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on this. And yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.